My name is Chloe. 2 years ago, on Mother's Day, in front of 12 members of my extended family, my mother looked me directly in the eyes and said, "I wish you'd never been my daughter." The room went completely silent. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. My aunt gasped softly. My sister just stared down at her own lap, refusing to meet my eyes. I stood there holding a handmade card I'd stayed up until 2 in the morning finishing, the ink still slightly smudged from where my hand had trembled while writing it, and I felt something inside me break in a way I don't think ever fully repairs. I left that house without another word. I didn't cry until I was 3 blocks away, sitting alone in my car outside a gas station, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. What I didn't know that night was that my mother's words weren't really about me at all. They were about a choice made 31 years earlier, one she never fully recovered from, one that had absolutely nothing to do with anything I'd ever actually done. I wouldn't discover the truth for another 4 months, and when I finally did, sitting in my grandmother's dim, quiet living room, holding a stack of letters older than I was, I finally understood exactly why my own mother had spent my entire life looking at me like a reminder of something she desperately wished had never happened. But before I tell you what happened next, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if stories like this mean something to you. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I always read them. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand exactly what growing up in that house felt like before you understand what that Mother's Day comment finally forced into the open. I was the older of 2 daughters. My sister Bianca came 4 years after me, and from as early as I can remember, something about the way our mother treated us felt fundamentally different. In ways I spent most of my childhood assuming were simply my fault. Bianca was effortless in our mother's eyes. Bianca got the warm smile when she walked into a room. Bianca got the encouraging phone calls before big presentations, the proud photos posted to social media after every small accomplishment, the easy, natural affection that seemed to flow toward her without any visible effort required. I got something different. Not cruelty, exactly. Not in those early years. Just a kind of persistent, quiet distance, a coolness underneath every interaction that I could never quite name, but always, somehow, felt. I remember being maybe 7 years old, showing my mother a drawing I'd made at school, incredibly proud of the rainbow I'd carefully colored in every possible shade I could find. She glanced at it for maybe 2 seconds before saying, "That's nice, sweetie," and turning back to whatever she'd been doing before I interrupted her. 2 weeks later, Bianca brought home a similar drawing. My mother taped it to the refrigerator, where it stayed for months, long after mine, which I'd also asked to have displayed, had quietly disappeared into a kitchen drawer within a week. I want you to understand, these moments felt small individually. That's the nature of this particular kind of pain. No single incident feels significant enough to point to and say, this is proof something's wrong. It's the accumulation, the years of small differences stacking on top of each other, that eventually build into something undeniable. I remember, around age 9, asking my father why Mom seemed happier around Bianca, even though Bianca was still just a toddler at the time, who mostly babbled and threw food off her high chair. He knelt down, ruffled my hair, and told me I was imagining things, that mothers loved all their children exactly the same. I wanted so badly to believe him that I let the question go, tucking it away somewhere I wouldn't have to look at it too closely, the way children often do with truths they aren't ready to fully hold yet. By the time I reached my teenage years, the pattern had become impossible to ignore, even for me, even as desperately as I wanted to believe I was imagining it. My mother attended every single one of Bianca's soccer games, sitting in the front row, cheering loudly enough that other parents commented on it. She missed my art show in 11th grade entirely, claiming a work conflict, though I later learned from my father that she'd actually stayed home that evening simply because she wasn't feeling up to it. When Bianca got into a competitive university program, my mother threw an elaborate celebration dinner, inviting nearly 30 family friends. When I got accepted into my own program 2 years earlier, a smaller school, but one I'd worked incredibly hard to get into, she offered a quiet congratulations, honey, over the phone, and nothing more. I asked her once, during a particularly vulnerable moment in my early 20s, whether she loved Bianca and me differently. "Don't be dramatic, Chloe," she said, waving off the question entirely. "I love you both exactly the same. You're just different from your sister. You always have been." Different. That word carried so much unspoken weight every time she used it. Weight I spent years trying to understand without ever getting a clear answer. My father, for his part, was a kind but largely passive presence throughout my childhood, someone who clearly loved me but rarely intervened when my mother's coolness became more pronounced. I think, looking back, he sensed something about the dynamic that he never fully understood himself, something that predated even his own relationship with my mother, and he simply learned, over years, not to poke at whatever quiet wound sat underneath it. I spent most of my 20s trying desperately to earn a warmth from my mother that never seemed to fully arrive, no matter what I accomplished. I finished my degree with honors. I built a stable career as a graphic designer, eventually starting my own small freelance business that grew steadily over several years. I got married to a genuinely wonderful man named Josh, who loved me completely, who saw exactly the value in me that my own mother seemed permanently unable to access. None of it seemed to matter. Every accomplishment I brought to her felt met with polite, distant acknowledgement, while Bianca's parallel milestones, sometimes objectively smaller in comparison, received full, enthusiastic celebration. The distance became more painful, not less, once Josh and I started trying to have children of our own. I went through a difficult miscarriage during our second year of marriage, a loss that devastated me in ways I still find hard to fully articulate even now. When I called my mother, crying, barely able to get the words out, she offered a brief, somewhat clinical "I'm so sorry, honey." These things happened before quickly changing the subject to an upcoming trip she was planning with Bianca. I remember sitting on my bathroom floor after that call, feeling more alone in my grief than I think I'd ever felt in my entire life. I called Bianca that same night, mostly because I needed someone, anyone, to actually sit with me in the pain instead of brushing past it. She drove over within the hour, sat with me on that same bathroom floor until nearly 2 in the morning, and never once mentioned her upcoming trip or tried to redirect the conversation toward anything else. I remember thinking, even through my grief, how strange it was that my sister could offer exactly the presence our mother couldn't, despite growing up in the very same house. What they didn't know, what I still didn't fully understand myself, even then, was that my mother's inability to fully show up for me during moments of real pain wasn't cruelty. It was something far more complicated, something rooted so deeply in her own unresolved history that she likely didn't fully understand it herself. That understanding, though, was still years away from reaching me. The Mother's Day that changed everything happened almost exactly 2 years ago at my parents' house, with our extended family gathered for the usual afternoon celebration: my aunt and uncle, my grandmother, a handful of cousins, Bianca and her fiancé, Josh and me. I'd spent weeks planning my gift that year, determined, as I always seemed to be, to find some way to finally break through whatever invisible wall stood between my mother and me. I made her a handmade photo book, carefully curated with dozens of pictures spanning her entire life as a mother, pictures of her holding me as a newborn, pictures from family vacations, pictures I'd spent hours digging through old boxes and digital archives to compile, each one accompanied by a handwritten note describing a specific memory I treasured. I stayed up until 2 in the morning the night before finishing the final pages, my hand cramping from writing, my eyes burning with exhaustion, driven by a hope I probably should have released years earlier. Bianca, that same Mother's Day, gave our mother an expensive spa weekend package along with a beautifully wrapped designer scarf. I watched my mother's face light up the moment she opened Bianca's gift, hugging her tightly, exclaiming over how thoughtful and generous it was. Then she opened mine. She flipped through the photo book slowly, her expression carefully neutral, offering a polite, "This is sweet," Chloe, before setting it aside on the coffee table, not quite as prominently displayed as Bianca's gift bag sitting proudly beside her chair. Something in me finally broke, quietly at first, in a way I hadn't fully planned or anticipated. "Did you even read any of it, Mom?" I asked, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. "I spent weeks on that." "Of course I read it, Chloe," she said, though her tone suggested she felt ambushed by the question in front of everyone. "Then why does it feel like everything I do for you is never quite enough?" I said, my voice rising slightly now, years of quiet hurt finally pushing past whatever careful restraint I'd maintained my entire life. "Why does Bianca get excited hugs, and I get 'this is sweet'? I've noticed it my whole life, Mom. Everyone in this room has probably noticed it too." The room went uncomfortably quiet. My aunt shifted in her seat. My grandmother, sitting near the window, set down her teacup carefully, watching the exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read at the time, though I understand it far better now. My mother's face flushed, embarrassment and something else, something sharper, flashing across her features. "Don't do this, Chloe," she said quietly. "Not today. Not in front of everyone." "When, then?" I asked. "Because I've been trying to talk to you about this for years, privately, and you always change the subject, or tell me I'm being dramatic. Maybe today is exactly the day this needs to come out." That's when she said it. The words that would echo in my head for months afterward, delivered not in a whisper, but loud enough for every single person in that room to hear with painful clarity. "I wish you'd never been my daughter." I don't think I fully processed the sentence in the moment it happened. I remember the silence that followed, feeling almost physical, pressing down on the entire room. I remember Josh's hand finding mine under the table, gripping it tightly. I remember Bianca finally looking up, her face pale with shock. I stood up slowly, picked up my purse, and walked out of that house without another word, because I genuinely didn't trust myself to speak without completely falling apart in front of everyone. I cried in my car outside a gas station 3 blocks away for almost 20 minutes before I could even bring myself to drive home. Josh found me still sitting in the driveway almost an hour after I'd texted him. I was on my way, engine off, staring blankly at our garage door. He didn't ask me to explain right away. He just opened my car door, knelt down beside me, and held my hand until I was ready to walk inside. That night, lying in bed, unable to sleep, I kept replaying my mother's face in the moment she said those words, trying to understand what could possibly live underneath a sentence that cruel, that specific, that clearly not improvised in the heat of an argument, but something that had apparently been sitting, fully formed, somewhere inside her for a very long time. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my adult life. I didn't speak to my mother at all for nearly a month. Bianca called me twice, apologetic in a way that felt genuine but also strangely helpless, admitting she'd noticed the difference in how we were treated for years, but never fully understood why, and had never known how to bring it up without causing exactly the kind of explosion that had just happened. My grandmother, my mother's own mother, called me about 5 weeks after that Mother's Day, her voice careful and unusually serious. "Chloe," she said, "I think it's time you and I had a conversation. Would you come visit me? Alone, if you can manage it." I drove to her small house the following weekend, unsure exactly what to expect, still raw from weeks of processing a wound I hadn't even fully understood I was carrying my entire life. She led me into her living room, made tea neither of us really drank, and finally, after a long, heavy silence, pulled a small wooden box down from a shelf in her bedroom closet. "I need to tell you something about your mother," she said. "Something she's never told you herself, and something I probably should have told you years ago, before things reached the point they reached on Mother's Day." Inside that box were letters, dozens of them, some clearly written by my grandmother, some in a handwriting I recognized instantly as my mother's, though far younger, more uncertain than the confident, controlled handwriting I'd grown up seeing on birthday cards and grocery lists. "Your mother was 17 years old when she got pregnant with you," my grandmother said quietly. I sat frozen, doing quick math in my head. My mother had always told me she and my father met in college, married at 23, had me at 25. The timeline I'd believed my entire life suddenly felt shaky beneath me. That's not what she's always told me, I said slowly. I know, my grandmother said, because the truth is far more complicated than the story she's told everyone for over 30 years. She poured more tea neither of us would drink, her hands trembling slightly around the teapot, and I could see how much this conversation was costing her too. A woman well into her 80s, finally deciding to break a silence she'd apparently kept for over 3 decades out of what I imagine was some tangled mixture of loyalty and shame. I should have told you sooner, she said. I told myself it wasn't my story to tell. I see now that silence just let the wound keep spreading, further than it ever needed to. She explained, carefully, painfully, a history I had absolutely no idea existed. My mother had gotten pregnant with me during her senior year of high school, with a boyfriend who disappeared almost immediately once he learned about the pregnancy. My mother, 17 years old, terrified, had wanted desperately to give the baby up for adoption, had already begun working with a local adoption agency, had picked out, according to one of the letters my grandmother showed me, a young couple she felt genuinely good about. My grandfather, a deeply traditional, controlling man I remembered only vaguely from early childhood before he passed away, refused to allow it. He believed adoption would bring shame on the family, refused to let his teenage daughter give away his grandchild, and instead forced my mother to keep the pregnancy, drop out of her planned early college enrollment program, and raise me herself. Your mother wanted to be a doctor, Chloe, my grandmother said softly. She had early acceptance into a pre-med program starting that same fall, a program she'd worked incredibly hard for. Your grandfather made her give it up entirely. He arranged a quick marriage to a family friend's son, not your biological father, a completely different man who agreed to raise you as his own in exchange for financial help with his own struggling business, and your mother spent the next several years watching every single dream she'd had for her own life disappear, replaced by a life she never actually chose for herself. I sat in that small living room, feeling the entire foundation of everything I thought I understood about my family quietly rearranging itself. The man I call Dad, I said slowly, isn't my biological father. My grandmother's expression softened with a kind of painful sympathy. No, sweetheart, he's not. And I don't believe your mother ever intended for you to find that out this way, or possibly at all. But given everything that's happened, I think you deserve to understand the full truth now, rather than continuing to carry blame for something that was never actually yours to carry. I read through several of the letters myself that afternoon. My mother's teenage handwriting, revealing a version of her I had never once glimpsed in over 30 years of being her daughter. Letters filled with grief over the future she'd lost. Letters describing nights spent crying alone in her childhood bedroom, terrified of the life being forced onto her. One particular letter, written just weeks before I was born, contained a line that has stayed with me ever since. I don't know how to love a baby I never wanted, born from a life I never chose. I'm so scared I'll resent her forever, even though none of this is her fault. I sat with that sentence for a long time, feeling an overwhelming, complicated wave of emotions I couldn't fully untangle in the moment. Grief for the 17-year-old girl who'd had her entire future stripped away by her own father's rigid pride. Anger, still, for over 30 years of feeling like a permanent disappointment for reasons that had absolutely nothing to do with anything I had ever actually done. And underneath both of those feelings, something unexpected, a strange, fragile empathy for a woman I had spent my whole life struggling to understand. Why did she have Bianca then? I asked my grandmother. If having me destroyed her life so completely, why have another child at all? By the time Bianca came along, my grandmother said, your mother had made a kind of peace with the life she'd been forced into. She'd finished a nursing degree part-time, slowly, over years, something she was proud of, even though it wasn't the medical career she'd originally dreamed of. Your father, the man who raised you, had become someone she'd genuinely grown to love, in his own quiet way, despite how their marriage began. Bianca was a child she and your father actually chose to have together, planned, wanted, at a point in her life when she finally felt some control over her own choices again. You were the child forced onto her at 17, a living, permanent reminder of the exact moment her entire life's trajectory got taken away from her. I asked my grandmother, quietly, whether she had ever tried to intervene, to push back against my grandfather's decision on my mother's behalf. She was silent for a long moment before answering. "I tried once," she said. "Your grandfather and I fought about it more than any other single thing in our entire marriage. But he controlled the finances, controlled most of the major decisions in that house. And I was, in my own way, just as trapped by that generation's expectations as your mother eventually was. I've carried guilt over my own silence for over 30 years, Chloe. I imagine that's part of why I finally decided to show you these letters. I couldn't undo what I failed to do for your mother. I could at least make sure the truth didn't stay buried any longer than it already had. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I certainly had to. Understanding, finally, after 31 years, exactly why my own existence had always seemed to carry a kind of quiet, unspoken weight for my mother, completely separate from anything about who I actually was as a person. I left my grandmother's house that evening, carrying those letters carefully in a folder on my passenger seat, my mind working through decades of memories, suddenly recontextualized through an entirely new lens. I want to be honest with you about the internal conflict I carried over the following weeks, because I think it matters. Part of me felt a genuine, unexpected compassion toward my mother, understanding now the trauma she'd carried silently for over 3 decades, a trauma she'd never once had the tools or support to properly process or heal from. Another part of me felt a fresh, sharper anger, because understanding where her coldness came from didn't erase over 30 years of feeling like a burden, a mistake, a permanent disappointment through absolutely no fault of my own. I debated for almost 3 weeks whether to confront her with what I'd learned at all. Part of me worried it would only deepen the rift already cracked wide open by that devastating Mother's Day comment. Another part of me understood that continuing to carry silent blame for a life circumstance that was never actually mine to be blamed for wasn't something I could keep doing indefinitely, not if I ever wanted genuine peace, whether that peace ultimately came with reconciliation or without it. I finally called my mother and asked if we could meet, just the two of us, somewhere private. We met at a quiet coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, both of us clearly nervous, neither of us having spoken more than a handful of stiff, careful words since that Mother's Day explosion nearly 6 weeks earlier. I brought the folder of letters with me, sitting between us on the small table like a physical weight neither of us could ignore. "Grandma told me the truth," I said quietly, once we'd settled into an uncomfortable silence. "About Dad, about the adoption you wanted, about what Grandpa forced you to do." I watched every ounce of color drain from my mother's face. "She had no right," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Maybe not," I said. "But I think I had a right to finally understand why my entire life I felt like I was somehow disappointing you just by existing." My mother was quiet for a long moment, staring down at her untouched coffee, her hands trembling slightly around the cup. "I have spent 31 years trying not to let you see it," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I have tried so hard, Chloe, to never let you feel like you were the reason my life didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. I clearly failed. I failed completely. And I am so sorry. Why didn't you ever just tell me?" I asked. All those years watching you struggle to connect with me, feeling like I was constantly falling short of some invisible standard. If I'd known, even a little, maybe I wouldn't have spent my entire childhood thinking something was fundamentally wrong with me. "Because telling you would have meant admitting it to myself," she said, admitting that I resented the daughter I was supposed to love unconditionally for something that was never her fault, not even a little bit. I couldn't face that about myself, so I just buried it. For 31 years, I buried it, and apparently, it came out anyway in every single interaction, every missed art show, every less enthusiastic hug, whether I meant for it to or not. I felt tears sliding down my face by that point, a complicated mixture of grief and something that almost resembled relief, finally hearing the truth spoken directly after decades of confusing, unexplained distance. "I'm not asking you to pretend the last 31 years didn't happen," I said. "I'm not asking you to erase how much this hurt me. Growing up feeling like Bianca's love came easy, and mine always had to be earned. But I think I needed to understand where it actually came from, because I spent my whole life assuming it was something wrong with me." "There was never anything wrong with you, Chloe," my mother said, crying openly now. "There was something deeply wrong with how a 17-year-old girl was forced into motherhood before she was ready, and something wrong with how I let that unprocessed grief quietly poison my relationship with an innocent child who deserved so much better from me." We sat in that coffee shop for almost 2 more hours, working through decades of unspoken history in a single, raw, exhausting conversation. It wasn't a magic fix. I want to be clear about that. 31 years of quiet emotional distance doesn't dissolve in a single afternoon, no matter how honest or overdue the conversation finally becomes. But it was a genuine beginning. I told Bianca everything a few days later, sitting on her living room floor the way we used to as kids, sharing a bag of chips between us like the years hadn't passed at all. She cried through most of it, apologizing repeatedly for a childhood advantage she'd never asked for and hadn't fully understood the shape of until that moment. "I always felt like the easy one," she said quietly, "but I never once thought about what that actually cost you." We talked until almost midnight, rebuilding something between us that our mother's silence had quietly strained for years, without either of us fully realizing it. My mother started individual therapy about 2 weeks after that coffee shop conversation, something she'd apparently avoided her entire adult life, likely out of exactly the same instinct that had kept this entire history buried for over 3 decades. She later told me it was one of the hardest, most necessary things she'd ever done, finally processing grief she'd been carrying silently since she was a terrified 17-year-old girl with absolutely no control over her own future. She also, at her therapist's gentle encouragement, wrote me a letter of her own about 6 months into that process, something she said felt easier than trying to say it all out loud in person. In it, she described, in detail I hadn't heard even during our coffee shop conversation, specific moments over the years she remembered pulling back from me emotionally, moments she now recognized, with the clarity therapy had given her, as unconscious reenactments of her own grief, rather than anything I had ever done to deserve them. Reading that letter, alone in my apartment, I cried for almost an hour, not from renewed hurt this time, but from something closer to relief. Finally having language for a pattern I'd spent 31 years experiencing without ever fully understanding. Our relationship, almost 2 years later now, remains a careful, ongoing work in progress. It's better, genuinely better, than it was before that devastating Mother's Day. We talk more openly now about hard things, about the specific moments over the years that hurt me deeply, moments she's finally able to acknowledge honestly instead of dismissing or minimizing. It's not perfect. There are still days when old patterns resurface, when I catch a flicker of that familiar distance, and I have to remind myself, gently, that 31 years of ingrained behavior doesn't fully disappear just because the root cause is finally understood. But I no longer carry the weight of believing something was fundamentally, permanently wrong with me. I understand now, with a clarity that took over 3 decades to reach, that my mother's coldness was never actually about my worth as a person, as a daughter, as a human being, deserving of love. It was about a wound she carried silently for far too long. A wound that had absolutely nothing to do with who I actually was. I found out, incidentally, a few months after that coffee shop conversation, that my biological father, the boyfriend who disappeared when my mother told him she was pregnant at 17, passed away almost a decade ago, according to a brief records search my grandmother helped me with. I felt surprisingly little about that discovery. Honestly, the man who raised me, Whatever complicated circumstances originally brought him into my life has been my real father in every way that has ever mattered. I did eventually tell him, gently, that I knew the full truth about how our family began. He held my hands across his kitchen table, tears in his eyes, and told me he'd never once, not for a single day since agreeing to raise me, thought of me as anything other than fully his daughter. The circumstances were complicated, he said. You never were. Hearing that, from the one parent who had never made me feel like a burden, even once in 31 years, gave me a kind of peace I hadn't expected to find in the middle of everything else unraveling that year. If there's one thing I want you to take from this story, it's this: the way people treat us often has far less to do with our own worth than we assume in the moment we're experiencing it. Sometimes the coldness, the distance, the quiet feeling of never being quite enough comes from a wound entirely separate from anything we've ever actually done. A wound the people hurting us are often carrying silently, sometimes for decades, without ever finding the courage to name it honestly. That understanding doesn't erase real hurt. It doesn't excuse decades of a child growing up feeling like a permanent disappointment, but it can, eventually, offer a different kind of freedom, the freedom to stop internalizing someone else's unhealed pain as evidence of your own inadequacy. If you've ever felt like you were somehow failing to earn love that should have been unconditional, I want you to consider, gently, that the story might be more complicated than you've been carrying it. Not to excuse anyone who's hurt you, but to release yourself, finally, from a blame that was never actually yours to hold in the first place. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that they were never the problem, no matter how convincingly someone else's pain made it feel that way. And if you've ever uncovered a family truth that finally explained something you'd spent years struggling to understand, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one,